The end of the world has always lived inside human imagination, not as an instant explosion, but as a slow unraveling of everything we have built. When people say the apocalypse, they often picture fire, ash, or some divine punishment, but in truth, it is not about the planet itself disappearing. Earth will remain. It is civilization that may not. The extinction of dinosaurs 65 million years ago proved that even the most dominant species can vanish in a blink of cosmic time. Humanity is not immune to that rhythm. Every empire, every age, every creation we call progress has its own hourglass quietly running down. If the dinosaurs were wiped out by an asteroid, our end may come from something more insidious ourselves. Science gave us intelligence, technology, and the ability to alter nature, yet it also gave us the tools to erase everything we know. Since the mid-20th century, humans have lived under a shadow of their own making, the nuclear era. It began as an experiment in physics and ended as a permanent question of morality. For the first time, extinction was not an accident of nature but an act of choice. In 1947, scientists from the University of Chicago introduced a symbol that captured that anxiety: the Doomsday clock. It was a simple image, a clock with its hands approaching midnight, each minute representing humanity's distance from self-destruction. Midnight was not a time, it was an idea, the point where human ambition crossed into suicide. At its debut, the clock stood 7 minutes before midnight, a warning shaped by the growing tensions of the early Cold War. Over the decades, as nuclear tests shook islands and deserts, as hydrogen bombs were built and stockpiled, that hand moved closer. Each adjustment told a story of both progress and peril. In the 1950s, the world witnessed nuclear detonations more powerful than all explosives used in World War II combined. By the early 1960s, the Cuban Missile Crisis had pulled the clock within striking distance of midnight, reminding everyone that annihilation could arrive not through monsters or meteors, but through the press of a single button. Even when the Cold War ended, the fear did not fade. It only changed shape, hidden under treaties and speeches, yet the weapons remained, silently ready. To understand the apocalypse is to understand this contradiction. We build what can save us and what can destroy us in the same breath. Religion once warned that judgment would come from above. Now, we have built our own heavens of fire. The book of Revelation describes stars falling from the sky and burning the earth today. That prophecy feels less divine and more engineered. A single nuclear missile, launched from a submarine deep beneath the Pacific, could make that vision real in less than 30 minutes. The concept of the end is not abstract anymore. It has coordinates, codes, and a countdown. As of this decade, the Doomsday clock stands just seconds before midnight, closer than ever in its 70-plus years of existence. Scientists no longer measure the threat only by warheads but by climate collapse, artificial intelligence, and biological weaponsal creations of our own intelligence. It is not nature turning against us. It is reason losing its restraint. To see the clock ticking is to witness the arrogance of a species that thought it could master the atom without mastering itself. The apocalypse, then, is not an event waiting to happen. It is a process already in motion. Every experiment, every missile test, every silent satellite orbiting above us is another turn of that clock's fragile hand. Humanity lives between those seconds, trying to pretend time can be negotiated. But time, like truth, cannot be bargained with. The apocalypse does not arrive with warning sirens. It begins quietly in laboratories, in political speeches, in decisions justified as defense. And perhaps the cruelest irony is that the same intelligence that dreamed of saving the world through science may one day be the reason there is no world left to save. Before humanity could fear the atom, it first had to learn how to break it. In the early 1940s, while World War II consumed continents, a group of the brightest scientists in history gathered under one of the most secretive operations ever conceived, the Manhattan Project. Led by General Leslie Groves and the theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, this alliance of American, British, and Canadian minds sought to turn theory into weaponry. What began as curiosity about energy soon evolved into a race to shape the future of war. The first success came in the deserts of New Mexico on July 16, 1945. The test was called Trinity. At 5:30 in the morning, the desert turned into daylight. The explosion released energy equal to 20,000 tons of TNT, melting sand into glass and igniting a new era of human power. Oppenheimer later recalled words from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." It was both revelation and confession, a sentence echoing through every missile silo ever built since. Only 3 weeks later, the world saw that power unleashed on cities filled with people. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay released the uranium bomb Little Boy over Hiroshima. The city vanished in a column of fire. 70,000 lives ended instantly. Another 50,000 would die in the following weeks from burns and radiation. The shadows of those who stood too close to the blast were etched permanently into concrete walsa, kind of negative photography of human existence. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second bomb, Fat Man, fell on Nagasaki. It was plutonium-based, even more powerful. The explosion leveled the Urakami Valley, killing another 75,000. Hospitals became tombs. Survivors walked through ruins with skin peeling from their bodies, a silent procession of what scientists had called collateral effects. By the time the mushroom clouds cleared, Japan surrendered, and humanity entered the atomic age. The official narrative claimed those bombs ended the war. But underneath the triumph lay a darker truth. The world had witnessed not victory, but revelation. For the first time, one nation had demonstrated the ability to erase another. The power of gods had become measurable, controllable, and transportable by aircraft. What was once myth became protocol. In the months following Hiroshima and Nagasaki, international debates began about morality, deterrence, and science's new burden. The same energy that could light cities could also vaporize them. Governments justified the creation of larger arsenals as protection, yet every new weapon made protection itself impossible. The Cold War was born from that paradox. The Soviet Union, unwilling to exist under American atomic monopoly, accelerated its own program. By 1949, the Soviets detonated their first nuclear device, and an invisible clock began ticking for the entire planet. The nuclear race was not just political, it was existential. Between 1949 and 1962, more than 500 nuclear tests were conducted above ground and underwater. Entire islands were sacrificed. The Bikini Atoll became a wasteland of glass and radiation. Sailors exposed to the blasts returned home glowing, with what doctors then called mystery burns. The Pacific became a laboratory for extinction. Back in the United States, atomic optimism replaced fear. Children practiced duck and cover drills, families built fallout shelters, and advertisements sold canned goods labeled radiation safe. The bomb became both nightmare and brand, a symbol of progress and paranoia. Even Hollywood joined the narrative, producing films that blurred heroism and annihilation. Through it all, a haunting question lingered. Had humanity crossed a line it could never retreat from? Einstein, who had once urged Roosevelt to investigate atomic research, would later write, "Our world faces a crisis, as yet unrecognized by those possessing the power to make decisions for it." The man who had inspired the path to the bomb became one of its most relentless critics. He warned that science without conscience was nothing but the ruin of the soul. From that moment onward, the atomic shadow stretched over every generation. The images of Hiroshima's ruins became warnings carved into collective memory, reminding us that intelligence without restraint can turn knowledge into apocalypse. The mushroom cloud over Japan was more than a weapons signature. It was a mirror reflecting what humans were capable of when fear and pride outweighed wisdom. And though decades have passed, the silence left behind by those two bombs still hums inside every reactor, every missile silo, every secret test. The war ended, but the clock began. By the time the world entered the third decade of the 21st century, nuclear weapons were no longer just symbols of deterrence, they had become statistics of survival. As of the year 2022, analysts confirmed a total of 12,705 nuclear warheads existing on Earth. Behind that number lay decades of political rivalry, scientific obsession, and a lingering fear that one miscalculation could rewrite human history in minutes. Russia, inheriting the arsenal of the former Soviet Union, possessed 5,977 warheads, of which 1,588 were ready for immediate launch. The United States followed closely with 5,428, maintaining 1,750 on active alert. China held approximately 350, France 290, the United Kingdom 225, Pakistan 165, India 160, and Israel around 90. Several other nations, including Iran and North Korea, hovered at the threshold nuclear potential without open confirmation. On paper, these numbers appeared to promise balance through fear, a fragile equilibrium known as mutually assured destruction. The logic was cold but clear. If any nuclear state attacked, the retaliation would guarantee total annihilation for both sides. In this grim equation, survival depended on the willingness to die. Peace existed not because of trust but because of terror. Each of those warheads carried an energy yield measured in kilotons or megatons units, so abstract they distort comprehension. One modern intercontinental ballistic missile could release a force greater than all the bombs dropped during World War II combined. A single warhead detonated over New York City would produce temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun, vaporizing everything within a 2-mile radius. The blast wave would flatten buildings across the 5 boroughs, while radiation would spread through the wind, turning millions of survivors into the condemned. Such figures are not speculation. They are calculations verified by decades of tests and models. From the deserts of Nevada to the frozen fields of Novaya Zemlya, the data is painfully consistent. Nuclear fire does not discriminate. Every city shares the same architecture of vulnerable metal, concrete, and flesh collapsing in sequence. The devastation does not stop at the explosion. It begins there. Beyond the raw count of warheads lies another layer of danger: the delivery systems. Submarines armed with Trident missiles, mobile launchers hidden deep in forests, and stealth bombers on perpetual standby all form the triad of deterrence. Each operates independently, ensuring that even if one system is destroyed, the others can retaliate. It is a network built not to prevent war but to guarantee that no one survives starting one. Economically, maintaining these arsenals drains billions of dollars every year. The United States spends over $40 billion annually on nuclear maintenance and modernization. Russia allocates roughly half that amount, despite its struggling economy. Yet both justify the expense as a defense investment, a phrase that sounds reasonable until one remembers what it defends against: extinction. Psychologically, the existence of these weapons rewires societies. Generations born after the Cold War still live under invisible pressure, their daily peace secured by the silent readiness of buried warheads. The notion that civilization could vanish in under an hour is not the subject of science fiction but a line item in military budgets. It is the ultimate paradox of modern life: stability maintained by instruments of chaos. Philosophers and theologians have tried to interpret this balance as a moral riddle. Some see it as proof of humanity's fallen naturine echo of the biblical story where forbidden knowledge brings both enlightenment and ruin. Others call it evolution's inevitable outcome: intelligence unrestrained by empathy. The Doomsday Clock, created 75 years ago as a metaphor, has become the closest thing we have to a spiritual artifact of science, reminding us that progress without humility is indistinguishable from destruction. Every statistic on a chart, every coded missile identifier, every satellite that tracks launch patterns forms part of the same truth: our survival depends on restraint, not technology. The numbers that measure destruction also measure how much faith we have left in our own reason. Humanity has mastered the atom, but not the impulse that created it. If the previous century was defined by the discovery of nuclear power, this one is defined by the struggle to forget it. Yet the math remains, carved into global reality. 12,705 warheads each, one a heartbeat in the countdown of civilization. The question is not whether they will ever be used, but whether we can live indefinitely knowing they exist. If nuclear war ever begins, it will not start with the thunder of missiles, but with silence the kind that lives inside computer screens and encrypted codes. A warning might flash somewhere deep within a defense center, a radar technician might mistake sunlight for an incoming strike, and from that single misunderstanding, a chain reaction would begin. The structure of nuclear war is mathematical, precise, and merciless. Once the first command is given, there is no human left to stop it. Experts classify such conflict in 2 levels: limited and total. A limited nuclear exchange might involve tactical warheads on isolated battlefields, perhaps a strike on a military base or an enemy fleet. It would kill tens of thousands within seconds, yet even that limit is an illusion. The moment one side launches, the other must respond, for hesitation means extinction. Thus, a small spark becomes a global inferno. In the age of intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, time itself becomes the enemy. These missiles travel at over 20 times the speed of sound, crossing oceans in under 30 minutes. The United States maintains its Minuteman systems buried beneath the plains of North Dakota and Montana. Russia's counterpart, the Topol-M, hides deep within forests, constantly moving to avoid detection. Submarines carrying Trident or Bulava missiles patrol beneath the Arctic, unseen and silent, capable of launching from anywhere on Earth. Together they form what strategists call the nuclear triad: land, air, and sea, each designed to ensure that no attack can go unanswered. In this architecture of destruction, even a false alarm can ignite catastrophe. History offers close calls. In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world within hours of annihilation. In 1983, Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov received a signal indicating that 5 American missiles were inbound. His instincts told him it was a malfunction, and he refused to report it as an attack. He was right, but had he obeyed protocol, the retaliation would have ended civilization before dawn. Humanity owes its continued existence to one man's skepticism. A modern nuclear confrontation would unfold faster than comprehension. Within minutes of detection, early warning satellites would alert command centers. The president or the Russian counterpart would receive an encrypted brief and a narrow window no more than a few minutes to decide whether the alert is genuine. Retaliation orders would be transmitted through hardened communication lines to missile silos, submarines, and air bases. From there, the system runs on automation. Even if leaders are killed in the first strike, pre-programmed retaliation sequences, known as dead hand systems, would ensure that the enemy is destroyed. Once engaged, there is no off switch. The first detonations would target strategic locations, capitals, command bunkers, and air defense grids. Within seconds, power networks collapse, satellites blind, and communication ends. Electromagnetic pulses from the blasts would silence every digital device across continents. The modern world, dependent on electricity and information, would be reduced to darkness. Then comes the second wave: cities, ports, industrial centers. In the United States, the targets would include New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston. In Russia, it would be Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, and strategic missile bases in Siberia. Each detonation would create firestorms merging into megafires, consuming oxygen, and generating winds faster than hurricanes. Temperatures at ground zero would reach several million degrees Fahrenheit. Human bodies would vaporize before their brains registered pain. Within an hour, the war would be effectively over. There would be no victors, only silence. Yet the real disaster would just begin. Nuclear winter, an unintended consequence of the explosions, would spread across the planet. Ash and soot, rising into the stratosphere, would block sunlight, plunging global temperatures by 1 or 2 degrees Celsius for years. Crops would fail, animals would die, and the few survivors would face famine. Civilization would collapse not in a day, but in a slow suffocation. Even the nations uninvolved would not be spared. Winds would carry radiation across borders, oceans, and hemispheres. A strike anywhere is a strike everywhere. Scientists have modeled the aftermath repeatedly, and each scenario ends the same. The biosphere does not distinguish between sides. The terrifying truth about nuclear war is not how easily it could happen, but how fast it would end everything we know. From the first warning to the last explosion, the timeline is measured not in days or hours, but in minutes. That brevity is what makes it permanent. Technology has compressed extinction into a schedule more efficient than any natural disaster. If the apocalypse once required gods or asteroids, now it needs only a decision, perhaps even a mistake. In that sense, humanity has already written its own final chapter. It simply hasn't chosen when to read it aloud. After the flash and the fire comes a darkness unlike any the world has ever known. Scientists call it nuclear winter, but the name does not capture the slow, endless cold that would follow. Within days of a global nuclear exchange, smoke and ash from burning cities would rise into the stratosphere. Billions of tons of soot would form a shroud that blocks sunlight, lowering global temperatures by between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. It sounds small, yet in the fragile balance of Earth's climate, such a drop would be catastrophic. The skies would dim, and the seasons would break. Sunlight would fade to a reddish haze that could linger for years. Without warmth, rainfall patterns would shift. Rivers would dry or freeze in unnatural rhythms. Crops would wither in the fields, and the oceans would cool, slowing the currents that sustain marine life. The world would not end with explosions, it would starve in silence. History already offers a grim preview. In the year 1815, the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia blasted so much ash into the sky that the world experienced the year without a summer. Temperatures plummeted by just under 1 degree, yet the result was famine across Europe and North America. Crops failed, livestock died, and millions went hungry. A nuclear winter would make that disaster seem merciful. Tambora was one volcano. 100 cities burning simultaneously would fill the atmosphere with smoke that sunlight could not pierce. Simulations by climate researchers show how fragile civilization truly is. If even 100 nuclear detonations occurred, a fraction of existing arsenals' global food production could collapse by up to 50% within a single year. Within 3 years, 2 billion people might starve. Radiation would settle into soil and water, contaminating the remaining food supply. Those who survived the blasts would face the longer death of famine. The oceans, once the planet's stabilizers, would turn against us. Radioactive fallout would poison marine ecosystems, killing plankton at the foundation of the food chain. Without plankton, oxygen levels in the atmosphere would decline. The planet would not just freeze, it would suffocate. Acid rain, thick with isotopes like strontium-90 and cesium-137, would erode what little life remained above ground. Human migration would begin again, but not toward hope, toward survival. People would flee the northern hemisphere for the equatorial regions, searching for warmth and food. Nations near the equator would become overcrowded and unstable, sparking new conflicts over shrinking resources. Disease would follow famine, spreading faster through malnutrition and contaminated water. Even the most advanced medical systems could not function without electricity, clean supplies, or uncontaminated blood. Religious voices would rise amid the chaos, interpreting the endless night as divine punishment. For centuries, scriptures from the Book of Revelation to the Quran have described the sun darkening and the stars falling from the sky as signs of judgment. Now science would fulfill those prophecies not through miracles, but through equations. The apocalypse would no longer belong to myth. It would be the direct result of human calculation. In those first years of darkness, the global economy would cease to exist. Currencies would lose meaning when there is nothing left to buy. Governments would dissolve, communication networks would fail, and survivors would cluster in isolated communities, guarding dwindling food stores like sacred relics. The modern world, once built on abundance, would rediscover scarcity. The environmental consequences would stretch across generations. Even if the clouds eventually cleared, the ozone layer would have been shredded by nitrogen oxides from the explosions. Ultraviolet radiation would pour through the atmosphere, sterilizing crops and blinding animals. Forests that survived the fires would die from exposure, turning whole continents into wastelands. For humanity, the hardest realization would not be that it caused the catastrophe, but that it could have been avoided. The same knowledge that split the atom also warned what would happen if we used it. Scientists, theologians, and poets alike had written of this ending for decades, yet nations kept arming themselves in the name of deterrence. When the final darkness falls, there will be no enemy left to hate, only the reflection of our own decisions. The nuclear winter is not simply a season, it is a verdict. It tells us that intelligence without empathy leads to extinction. It is the moment when the miracle of human reason turns on itself, proving that our greatest achievement was also our most fatal mistake. The Earth will continue, orbiting the sun as it always has, but the civilization that once called itself enlightened may be remembered only by the dust it left suspended in its own artificial night. The first survivors of a nuclear war would not feel lucky. They would emerge from their shelters into a world that no longer resembled Earth. Cities once glittering with light would become skeletons of concrete and twisted steel. The ground would glow faintly in the dark, not from electricity, but from radiation lingering in soil and air. The invisible poison cesium, strontium, iodine, and plutonium would saturate everything, from dust to water to the food chain itself. Life, as biology once defined it, would be rewritten by decay. The immediate radiation sickness would arrive quickly: nausea, bleeding gums, blistered skin, hair falling in handfuls. But these are only the symptoms of the living. For those who survive the first month, the deeper wounds come later. Their DNA would carry mutations, silent errors passed to their children. Generations would be marked not by culture or language, but by deformity and disease. The children of the apocalypse would be born under a genetic shadow. The world has seen glimpses of this future before. In 1986, the explosion at Chernobyl in Ukraine turned an entire region into a radioactive desert. Forests changed color overnight. Animals died where they stood. Decades later, wolves, boars, and even horses returned, thriving not because the land was safe, but because humanity had gone. Nature reclaims faster than it heals. Similarly, after the Fukushima disaster in 2011, entire Japanese towns were left frozen in time grocery stores with full shelves, playgrounds covered in ash. Clocks stopped at the moment of evacuation. These places are not ruins. They are warnings. A global nuclear war would magnify those tragedies beyond comprehension. Radiation would contaminate rivers, turning them into streams of death. Oceans would carry isotopes across currents, poisoning fish, and coral reefs thousands of miles away. Dust storms filled with radioactive particles would circle the globe for years, ensuring that no region, no matter how remote, remains untouched. Even the rain would burn. Civilization's dependence on electricity would become its undoing. Power grids destroyed by electromagnetic pulses could not be rebuilt easily. Satellites would be gone, navigation useless, communication dead. Hospitals, once symbols of hope, would turn into morgues when medicine runs out. Without refrigeration, without clean water, infection would finish what the bombs began. The line between survivor and victim would blur until it disappears entirely. Some nations have planned for this. Deep beneath the Alps, in Switzerland, stand reinforced shelters with steel doors 20 centimeters thick and concrete walls over 1 meter deep. Inside are air filters, water reserves, and rations designed to last half a year. They represent humanity's instinct to endure at any cost. But outside those mountains, billions would face extinction. Survival would become a lottery drawn by geography and chance. In this new world, the hierarchy of power would collapse. Governments would vanish. Economies would evaporate. What remains would be small communities, each struggling to protect scarce food and clean water. Trade would revert to barter. Language itself might fracture as isolation grows. Over time, memory would fade. The internet, books, archives, all of it could vanish within a generation. Humanity would return to oral history, telling stories not of gods but of fire. Philosophers have often wondered whether intelligence guarantees survival. The answer after the flash would be clear. It does not. The same mind that engineered satellites and medicine also engineered extinction. Evolution does not favor wisdom. It favors adaptation. And yet, even amid the devastation, life would persist. Moss would grow on melted glass, insects would reclaim the ruins, and somewhere, perhaps, a single green shoot would break through the radioactive soil, a sign that Earth forgives more quickly than it forgets. But the survivors, those few scattered souls, would live knowing they inhabit a museum of mistakes. Every sunrise filtered through the haze would remind them of what was lost. They would breathe, but each breath would carry the weight of history's final experiment. In time, the children of the survivors might no longer know what came before: the cities, the music, the constellations of satellites that once lit the night sky. They would inherit a world cleansed of memory, rebuilt on ashes, still humming faintly with radiation. Life after the flash would not be a return to the Stone Age. It would be something far stranger: a civilization aware of its own ending, walking through the ruins of its intelligence. Humanity might survive, but humankind would not. The species that once reached for the stars would learn to hide from its own reflection, buried beneath layers of concrete and silence, wondering if survival without meaning is any different from extinction. Long before the first bomb ever fell, humanity had already begun digging into the earth, seeking safety from itself. The image of survival changed from divine salvation to reinforced concrete and filtered air. Switzerland became the global blueprint for endurance. In 1963, its government passed a law requiring that every building include a fallout shelter. What began as cautious bureaucracy became an architectural philosophy-owned nation preparing not just for war, but for the end of civilization. Hidden beneath the quiet villages of the Alps are thousands of shelters carved into granite, their entrances sealed by steel doors 20 centimeters thick. The air is purified by chemical filters capable of removing radioactive particles, and every room has pressure locks to prevent contamination. Deep inside, the temperature remains steady, the lights artificial, the world reduced to survival metrics: air, food, and time. Among these fortresses, one stands as legend: the K-20 facility, constructed during the Cold War at a cost of $259 million. Buried 1,200 meters above sea level, it can sustain hundreds of people for 6 months without external contact. Inside are water purification systems, sleeping quarters, food rations, and even medical units equipped for surgery. It is not merely a shelter, it is a civilization preserved in miniature, built to wait for a world that may never return. The deeper irony is that the K-20 was designed not for the masses, but for the select few political leaders, scientists, and military officers whose survival was deemed essential for continuity. Humanity, it seems, divided itself even in preparation for extinction. While billions would burn above ground, a few thousand would wait below, carrying the burden of species continuity on their shoulders. The shelters were not only walls against radiation, they were mirrors reflecting inequality at its purest. Around the world, other nations followed with their own secret bunkers. The United States constructed the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, an underground city shielded by granite. Norway built its own seed vault on the island of Svalbard, storing millions of plant specimens inside permafrost, a genetic insurance policy for a world without farmers. Russia, long obsessed with endurance, built entire subterranean networks beneath Moscow capable of housing tens of thousands. China expanded mountain fortresses for government officials, blending secrecy with myth. These sanctuaries, though impressive, reveal a contradiction. To survive the apocalypse, one must already belong to the class that caused it. The ordinary citizen will never see the inside of these walls. The shelters promise hope, but only to those who need it least. For the rest of humanity, survival remains theoretical. Inside the bunkers, life would be sterile and timeless. The air recycled endlessly, the food packaged, the days marked not by sunlight but by electric clocks. Conversations would drift toward memory of skies once blue, of oceans once vast. The isolation would test the human spirit more than radiation ever could. When a society is reduced to pure survival, it risks forgetting why survival mattered at all. Psychologists who studied isolated communities predict a slow unraveling. First cooperation, then suspicion, then despair. Without sunlight, without natural rhythm, the mind loses its sense of time. Inside a bunker, eternity is not peace, it is suffocation stretched across minutes. The survivors might live, but they would no longer be human in the way we once understood humanity. Even if the outside world stabilized decades later, the reemergence would be perilous. The environment would still pulse with radiation. Ecosystems would have mutated. Crops might no longer grow. Animals might not be edible. The air itself could burn the lungs. Emerging from the shelters would not be a rebirth, it would be an experiment to test whether Earth still accepts its children. Yet there is an unsettling question behind all this engineering. What exactly are we trying to save? If survival means preserving our species but losing our essence, then what remains of civilization? The shelters beneath the mountains may protect bodies, but they cannot preserve meaning. The people who emerge will inherit not a world but a tomb of ambition, an archive of how far humanity was willing to go to escape its own mistakes. And perhaps that is the ultimate irony of the shelters. They prove that even at the edge of extinction, we believe in control. We dig tunnels and build vaults as if concrete can outlast conscience. But no wall, no door, no design can hide from the truth that the danger was never the atom, it was us. When Albert Einstein uttered the words, "I do not know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones," he was not predicting the future. He was describing the nature of humanity. The quote was both a prophecy and a lament, an acknowledgement that technological brilliance without moral maturity leads not to progress but to ruin. In that single line, Einstein captured the paradox of our species. We create faster than we understand. The modern world continues to live under the same paradox. We call ourselves advanced because we have split the atom, explored other planets, and mapped the human genome. Yet the hands of the Doomsday clock remain closer to midnight than at any time in its 70-year history. The clock, designed in 1947 as a metaphor for human peril, has become a literal measurement of our arrogance. It now counts in seconds, not minutes. That should terrify us. Yet most of us scroll past the headlines as though time itself can be muted. Einstein's warning was not about bombs. It was about responsibility. He understood that knowledge without restraint transforms creation into self-destruction. Every scientific breakthrough since then, whether artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, or quantum computing, carries the same potential to elevate or annihilate. We stand at the intersection of enlightenment and extinction, holding the same tools that could cure diseases or destroy continents. The difference lies only in intention. When the first nuclear bomb detonated over Hiroshima, it was not just a military event, it was a moral collapse. Humanity had proven that it could end its own story at will. Since then, nations have built more warheads, written more treaties, and produced more justifications, but the equation has never changed. Deterrence, the foundation of nuclear peace, is built on fear, not trust. It assumes that survival depends on the perpetual threat of annihilation. In essence, our civilization survives not because we are wise, but because we are terrified. The tragedy is that fear cannot last forever. Generations born after the Cold War have grown up without understanding the weight of that threat. For them, nuclear war is history, not hazard. The memory of Hiroshima fades, the stories of Chernobyl turn into documentaries, and the Doomsday clock becomes a background symbol on a scientist's wall. Forgetting, however, is its own form of danger. The absence of fear breeds complacency, and complacency is the most silent weapon of all. Einstein believed that humanity's only salvation was empathia force that cannot be measured in megatons or treaties. It is what reminds us that every life, every city, every dream is connected by the same fragile air. When leaders argue about deterrence and military balance, they often forget that beneath the statistics lie faces, families, and futures. A single warhead does not erase a target. It erases generations. Today, as we stare once more into the abyss of our own design, we must decide what kind of species we wish to be. The apocalypse is not a prophecy carved in stone, it is a choice written in code, in politics, in every moment of indifference. We still have time, but time has grown thin. Every test, every threat, every weapon waiting in silence inches that clock closer to midnight. If the end ever comes, it will not announce itself. There will be no final warning, no divine trumpet, only the quiet hum of machines and the brief glow of light as humanity disappears. What remains might not even be dust, but memorachos of a species that could have chosen wisdom but chose power instead. And so, we return to Einstein's haunting vision. The future is still in our hands, trembling between reason and ruin. The question is not whether we can survive, but whether we deserve to. Thank you for watching. What do you think about this topic? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your perspective.